My name is Brever35 and I am a professional wrestling fan. I don't know why I like it, I just always have. The first time I watched wrestling, I was like 7 years old, and the first match I ever saw involved Demolition beating some jobbers in the old WWF. It was from that time I was hooked on professional wrestling. The Ultimate Warrior quickly became my first favourite wrestler, as well as those who attended my school, as well as my cousins. One thing that I recall during my early school years were that the boys in my class and myself would use the zinc, which was meant to protect us from the sun during summer, would use that zinc to replicate the face paint worn by the Ultimate Warrior. So you can imagine the teacher's surprise when they would return after periods such as the lunch break and come back where half of her class was zinced up as the Ultimate Warrior. It wasn't long, maybe a few weeks later, our principal at our school banned zinc from being brought to school. Which brings me to the question of, did any of you face paint your face like your favourite wrestler? As well as that, I remember that it was so easy to talk about wrestling with friends and family, with the biggest topic being whether you were either a Hulk Hogan or Ultimate Warrior fan. It was also at this time, as kids, we would recreate what we saw on television in the backyard on the trampoline or on our parents' beds. As for NWA or WCW, I didn't know a lot about them except the name of a wrestler named Sting. However, due to our replications of the WWF, as well as the media linking incidents involving kids to wrestling, the only channel that carried the old WWF was forced to cancel WWF programming. Because of this, I was no longer in the loop with the going-ons in the WWF as much. Although from time to time our Blockbuster would have the occasional wrestling tape from WWF. The once published WWF magazines were still being sold in store. However, wrestling for me was not the same as before. When I got to high school, I made friends with a couple of mates who owned their own WWF videos, who would often lend me these for a night or a few weeks so I could get me a wrestling fix, as well as an update of what was going on in WWF. The first thing that I did realize was that the big guys like Hulk Hogan and Ultimate Warrior were no longer considered for the WWF title, or they were no longer in WWF at all. At this time, Bret Hart was the WWF champion, and the likes of fellow WWE Hall of Famers Shawn Michaels and Razor Ramon were battling over the WWF Intercontinental title. Much later, wrestling eventually returned to free-to-air television in New Zealand. What we received was WCW Pro, which had a lot of lower to mid-carders matches, finished with a few highlights from Monday Nitro that week. This was when I realized where the former WWE wrestlers like Hogan and Macho Man had gone, and were a part of the NWO, who were always confronted each week by the man known as Sting, dressed up in a crow gimmick. A few months later, another free-to-air channel in my country began showing WWF Shotgun. It was similar to the WCW Pro Wrestling programming on the other channel. Although WCW Pro and WWF Shotgun weren't showcasing much of their biggest stars, one thing each channel did do was showcase each promotion's pay-per-view for free-to-air television in full. Yep, I was living at the same time as the Monday Night Wars. Not only that, but I was beginning to watch a new style of wrestling from ECW. However, one thing that did occur was the amount of people around me who liked wrestling were way smaller than when I first became a wrestling fan in the very beginning. In the late 90s, both WCW Pro and WWF Shotgun were eventually replaced by WCW Nitro and WWF Raw. And if I was to make a confession, there were times during the Monday Night Wars where I found WCW programming better and vice versa. Especially when WCW had guys like Goldberg and the NWO, and Sting was really hot at the time as well. However, in the end, WWF began to change their content to the Attitude Era, and storylines with Austin and McMahon, Undertaker vs Mankind and Kane, and the ever-growing popularity of The Rock soon changed my mind altogether, that the WWF, in my opinion at least, was way better than WCW. Nevertheless, I still watched WCW, and back at that time, the dream match in that time was Goldberg vs Stone Cold Steve Austin. It is also during the Attitude Era that I became a fan of The Rock. Yep, wrestling was awesome, but WCW was beginning to lose momentum in the Monday Night War ratings, and eventually in 2001 it was sold to Vince McMahon. At first, our dream matches that we had in high school between WWF wrestlers and WCW wrestlers seemed like they would come to a reality. However, this never occurred, as only a few good wrestlers like Booker T came over to WWF, while the other better wrestlers like Goldberg and Sting didn't at that time. In between 2002 and 2005, I wasn't watching the now WWE as much, as it had been moved to pay TV. So I would keep up to date with WWE via the website lordsofpain.net. One thing I did like was that Total Non-Stop Action was an alternative to WWE. Also at this time, one highlight for myself in 2005 was I received a WWE Road to WrestleMania 22 ticket for my birthday, which took place in Wellington, New Zealand. From 2005 to 2008, I was watching WWE programming again. And around the end of 2008, I was also watching some Total Non-Stop Action wrestling as well. However, from 2008 to 2010, watching professional wrestling was very minimum again, as I was involved in other commitments. In 2011, I was watching WWE programming more regularly, and it's about this time that I became a fan of CM Punk, especially after his pipe bomb on Monday Night Raw against Vince McMahon, John Cena and WWE. In particular, this pipe bomb made me appreciate that he was on a grand stage speaking what was on his mind, as well as what was on the mind of wrestling fans, which was that the WWE product was stale. In addition, he brought back, in my eyes, the likable heel that I had seen through the Monday Night Wars like Stone Cold Steve Austin. And what also made CM Punk appealing to me was his acknowledgement to wrestlers, such as when Macho Man Randy Savage passed away. When CM Punk left the WWE, I still continued to watch WWE, and at the end of that year, I couldn't wait long enough for Colt Cabana's Art of Wrestling podcast with CM Punk, which was also around the time I began watching wrestling related content from wrestling fans around the world discussing things wrestling on YouTube. And that is what I will focus on for episode 2 of my 10-part video series for Wednesday Wrestling.